Hi, welcome back. So I wanted to just talk quickly on the reasons why I developed this course in the first place, and it really is stemmed out of some of the limitations I found when working with my BI tool, Power BI. So you'll probably have noticed that within Power BI desktop and service, there are built-in connectors that you can access. So within the get data option, you've got all these different connectors like MailChimp, Facebook, and so on. There's loads of them, but um, and they work great because they all work in the cloud seamlessly. You don't need to set up any gateways, and generally they're pretty good. However, the limitations are that um, I've found that the actual data set or the endpoints that you might need are not all completely covered within these connectors. And secondly, it's limited by what the Power BI team have pushed out. So they're not pushing out connectors every single day. There are kind of just the you know apps that are used by lots of people, which they prioritize and built for. Which I mean, and these might work for you, which is fine. So I don't want to knock that. But if you need to connect with an app that's not here, what do you do? That can present a problem. So what do you do in those situations? So you can either go and buy third-party connectors, which I've done also in the past, or you can build your own connectors. So let me just quickly go into option one and the various different options you've got when you're buying connectors. So you may have seen these advertised, and they normally come in the form of ODBC drivers, or there might be ADO.NET drivers, or there might be SSIS components. So these are typically installed on your machine locally, and for them to work you need to set up a gateway. So the way that Power BI works is you need a gateway installed on your computer which interfaces directly with Power BI service. So every time you need to refresh the data, Power BI service will initiate effectively like a trigger to say for instance the ODBC driver that's installed on your machine, and then it's the ODBC driver which then makes the API calls and pulls in the data, and then pushes that data into your Power BI model. And I think it works similarly in ADO.NET, though I've not used that, so if I'm wrong, I could be wrong there. You also got SSIS components, which is part of the SQL Server package. So if you have SQL Server license, you may be lucky to get SSIS included. However, using SSIS comes with another bag of complexity, and again, SSIS has to be installed on your machine. As far as I know, there's no cloud-based option for this, but I could be wrong. So don't hold me to that. There's also other options I think as well. You can use cloud-based ETLs. So you may have heard of services like Blendo, Data.World, Stitch, and there are quite a few out there. So there are generally two options. So these work effectively through installed on your machine with a gateway, and you have to install drivers. And the other option is like cloud-based services. A couple of pros and cons. So for ODBC drivers, they're quick to get going. That low fees should be a pro, not a con. So forgive me for that. That's in the wrong place. But what I found in my personal experience, and you may have found this the same, is that ODBC drivers can be quite buggy and prone to failure, especially when interacting with Power BI service refreshes. And I'll go into why this is the case. For SSIS, you do need additional licenses, or you may need additional licenses. Again, you're only limited by what the vendor has provided, because it's a third-party vendor. I mean, if your app is not covered, then you're going to have to build something from scratch anyway. So you do need a gateway to be set up. You do need so Power BI, I found that doesn't work very well with multiple connections within a single PBIX file. So if you're dealing with multiple connections with multiple ODBC drivers, doesn't always work very well. And I'll go into why I think that is the case. I think one of the big issues is that OAuth can only be initiated on the local machine itself. So if you need your clients, or if you work in a situation where you've got multiple clients, potentially you're running a consulting business, because the OAuth initiates on your local machine, you need your customer or client to come and grant access through the pop-up window that happens when you initiate OAuth, or they maybe have to remote into your machine, and it's not an ideal workflow um, um, for that to happen. So generally these drivers have been developed in the scenario where you yourself are just connecting to your own data or your own company's data. It's not really designed for using like scenarios where you've got multiple clients that need to connect their individual data for their individual reports. It wouldn't work in those scenarios, so that's the limitation. ETLs are really good actually, they're quite powerful, and they do have a lot of different apps that they cover now. However, they can be expensive, and again you're limited by what's on offer. So there's this good link on Panoply, and Panoply is another kind of ETL service, and they go through all the kinds of all their competitors, and you can see that there's different products out there. You got Power Center, £2,000 a month, SSIS, quite expensive again, Talend, Panoply, themselves, Stitch, it's fairly reasonable I guess, Blendo and so on. I guess the point I'm making is that if you only want to connect to like a particular data set, then going down this route is kind of overkill, especially on the expense side. And I just wanted to touch on why I think if you did want to, of these options, one or two, probably the cheapest is going to be, going down the ODBC driver route and getting ODBC drivers. And this is the kind of setup that you'll have to implement. So you have your gateway set up, Power BI service if you're pushing to the cloud. Effectively works like this, where the Power BI service makes a trigger to your via the gateway to your desktop machine, to your ODBC driver. The ODBC driver makes the API calls and then returns data back from whatever system. So it could be like HubSpot, for example, and then that data is then returned via the gateway. This has some limitations because your computer effectively has to be on all the time, and multiple connectors don't tend to work very well. And also the way that Power BI refreshes work, it only takes one connection to fail. So it could be like one API call that's timed out. It could be API call thresholds could have been hit, which will cause that refresh to fail. If your local machine is completely dependent on your local machine's power, so whether it's memory or processing speed. So generally, from an architecture design, this is a bad design. And it's fine if you're only like working with like Excel or something like that on your local machine, but if you are pulling in data from multiple data sets via ODBC drivers, this is a bad design. So how do you overcome this? It's better to, rather than have this kind of setup where you're pulling in data on each fetch, effectively triggering these ODBC API calls on each fetch or each refresh. It's better to just create a single data set, like within an SQL database, or just maybe even a set of CSV files, because Power BI can handle that pretty easily. If it's just a single data set, or single data set like a SQL database, or multiple flat files, it handles them without any issues. However, you can't do that with ODBC drivers, because the way that ODBC drivers work is they load the data directly into Power BI data model. They don't load them into a separate database or anything like that. There may be a way to get around this by using a different type of drivers, but it does get a bit complicated. The other thing is, the other option is then to build your own connectors. And now you can either write your connectors through Power Query. Now this will only work where you've got very simple API calls that you're making. So whenever you've got to do like pagination or anything more complicated, this won't work. Power Query won't be an option that you can use. So the other option is then to write your connector in Power Query's SDK. And again, this effectively is how the ODBC drivers are built, is through Power Query's SDK. And if you're a coder, then go for it. Or if you are alright with hiring a developer, then go for it. But obviously you then have your other issues of managing that developer. There might be additional costs involved. And again, you're going down the route of installing something locally on your machine, and you're going to be susceptible to this architectural pattern, which is not great in my opinion. So I think this is a better solution. So you first decouple the process of the refresh, the refresh that happens in Power BI, for instance. And when I talk about refresh, these refresh could be the same for like Tableau or any other service. But you decouple the refresh. Instead, what you do is you manage all the API calls on a schedule within the cloud using cloud-based services. So you use these cloud-based services to extract the data that you need. And I'm specifically going to be talking about a service called Azure's Logic Apps, which enables you to do this. Push that data then into a single data set or CSVs, multiple CSV files that are stored on a OneDrive. This has the beauty that you can then manage how frequent you want to update this data here. So if you want to do like daily data, that's fine. If you want to do to the second data, it's fine. But you decouple this whole data set, refreshing the data set from any particular refresh, which will make sure that this always runs properly every time. So when so all you simply then do is you connect your Power BI service or desktop, whatever it is, via direct query or import directly to your data set. It's far more better solution. Architecturally, it's better, because even if your API calls fail within here, it only fails for that particular connector that you built. It doesn't break the entire refresh. So it's a better solution in my opinion. And and also APIs change all the time, like version 2, version 3 and so on. The vendors, the applications that are managing the APIs, they might just make an API change, or they might deprecate an API or an endpoint, or they might make a new API to their app. You're going to have to recompile or redo all the code that you just did for your if you did the coding solution. With Logic Apps, it's actually very quick and easy to make changes on the fly without affecting without affecting you too much. So which is why I believe Logic Apps is a great solution for extracting data. So again, this is no coding, it's rapid. You don't get any refresh failures. It's very cheap as well to use Logic Apps. It's flexible, and you're agnostic of any BI tool. So I just want to touch on this point again. So because you're creating a separate data set, you don't necessarily have to use Power BI. You can use Tableau, you can use any BI tool, Excel, whatever you want, and directly connect to this data set. It's very powerful, because if you, for instance, in the future wanted to switch services, or you had a client that didn't want to use Power BI, it's very easy to do. So I teach a course about this. It's called Learn to Build Your Own Connectors Without Writing Any Code, and I go through the three main authentications that are most widely used nowadays for REST API authentications, which are OAuth2, Basic Auth, and API keys. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about that course, you can find the details on my website. And yes, so that's it really. So I just wanted to go through that and give you the reasons why I've created this.